I'm Rachel Monroe. I'm 29 years old, and ever since I got the message about a family meeting back in Pine Valley, California, I knew what was waiting for me. The kind of silence that hums behind gritted smiles. My sister's last words still rang in my head. "You can't even afford a real car." She'd said it like a joke, but not a kind one. In that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be just about Mom's health or Dad's memory. It was going to be about how much or how little they thought I was worth. And for once, I had no intention of leaving empty-handed. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and tap that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best. I grew up as the youngest of 3 in Pine Valley, a quiet California town that prides itself on wine country charm and carefully kept appearances. My parents, Marlene and Franklin, raised us to be polite, keep our voices low at the table, and wear our best for church even. If the soles of our shoes were worn through, they believed in hard work and saving face. But underneath it all, success had a look to it, one you could photograph and frame. Candace and Darren lived that picture to the letter and made sure everyone else did too. Darren was the hometown star, turned real estate broker who married into a vineyard dynasty and now walked into Sunday brunch in pressed slacks with tales of 6-figure closings. Candace moved to Los Angeles, climbed the corporate ladder in record time, and now spent her weekends at galas and fundraisers where everyone wore the same shade of champagne and sipped it too. It didn't matter that I once sat up all night fixing Mom's broken laptop or that I taught myself to code to save money on tutoring. The only thing anyone seemed to notice was that I stayed behind when the others moved up and out. By the time I turned 18, I'd had enough of being told that my curiosity was a phase, that coding apps was a quirky detour, and that real life meant a steady paycheck and a nice man. Instead, I took the tips I'd earned waitressing and moved to Los Angeles, renting a room above a bakery and turning my sketchpad ideas into prototypes. They laughed when I told them I was building something they didn't ask. What it was, just warned me I'd better have a backup plan. The worst part wasn't their disbelief. It was how little they seemed to care whether I made it or not. For years, I let them think I was barely getting by, partly because it was easier, and partly because for a while it was true. Those early days were lean, more coffee than meals, more rejection than wins. But something kept me going. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the quiet promise I made to myself to one day sit at their table and not feel small anymore when Mom called to say she'd broken her hip and Dad's memory was fading faster. I knew I couldn't hide behind that promise much longer. I booked a one-way ticket back home, threw a sweater and jeans into my old backpack, and boarded a commercial flight to Fresno, while my assistant Brittany shook her head and reminded me I owned a car company. Now I told her it didn't matter. Not yet. Not for this. Not until I decided whether I was going back as the Rachel they remembered or the one they never really saw. What I didn't know yet was that by the time I walked into that family meeting, I'd be sitting on a secret that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about me. Mom greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her hug was careful, her movements stiff from the surgery. I offered to help her sit down at the kitchen table, but before I could pull out a chair, Darren was already back in the room with a binder in his hands. He moved around the kitchen like it was a conference room, pointing out care options and quoting price tags, as if our parents were a business investment. He barely looked at me except to pause, with a reminder that any help you can offer is appreciated, Rachel. Dinner that evening wasn't home-cooked. Darren had ordered from one of the upscale winery cafes nearby herb chicken, roasted vegetables, fresh bread wrapped in linen. The kind of spread meant to impress, not comfort. Mom tried to act pleased, commenting on how generous Darren was to cover the cost. He gave a modest shrug, but his eyes flicked toward me when he said, "Family's worth it, no matter what the bill looks like." I smiled without showing teeth and cleared the wrappers off the counter, while Mom arranged the food on the best dishes she could still reach. Candace arrived just as we were setting the table. She breezed in with 3 shopping bags looped around one arm and a phone still pressed to her ear. Her hair was perfect, her outfit crisp, like she hadn't stepped off a plane, but rather out of a magazine. She kissed Mom on the cheek, passed out a few gifts, Cabernet for Dad, a soft scarf for Mom, a wallet for Darren. When she reached me, her eyes hesitated just for a second. "And for you," she said, handing over a small envelope, "a little something for job interviews. Thought you might want to refresh your closet." I tucked the gift card into my pocket. "Thanks," I said quietly. That was thoughtful. We sat down to eat, but most of the conversation circled around them. Darren's recent property sale, Candace's latest client, and the new office renovation she was overseeing. She mentioned the view from the top floor twice, how it overlooked vineyards just like the ones back home. I nodded, chewing slowly, letting the conversation wash over me. When they finally turned to me, Candace gave a practiced smile. "How about you, Rachel? Any movement on those little projects of yours?" I reached for my glass. "Just some small business work," I said. "Freelancing mostly." Darren leaned in. "I've got contacts if you're looking for something more stable. Basic stuff, but it's a paycheck." I nodded again. "I appreciate that. I didn't mention the equity I still held. I didn't mention the team I'd just expanded or the nonprofit my company was now funding in 3 states. I let them fill the silence with their version of my life, same as always." Dad spoke up, his voice quieter than I remembered. "Still in that little apartment with the loud neighbors?" he asked. That apartment had been 3 addresses ago. "It's comfortable," I said. Candace laughed softly. "Comfort is relative, Rach. Remember when you thought you'd made it because you could buy real wine instead of the box stuff?" Darren chuckled, reaching for more bread, and I kept my hands in my lap. Talk shifted to the reason we'd all come back, Mom and Dad's care. Darren took the lead again, laying out options like he was hosting a seminar. He'd found a new facility with private rooms, gourmet meals, social activities. Wine tastings, walking trails, memory care, he said, flipping through photos on his tablet. "They'd be comfortable taken care of. It's what they deserve." Candace nodded in agreement. "It's a little steep," she added, "but we've figured out how to cover most of it." Darren followed with the breakdown. "We'll handle 60% between the 2 of us. That leaves 10% for you, Rachel, around $800 a month." He said it like he was being generous. "But if that's too much," Candace added, "there are other ways to contribute. Visits, phone calls. Emotional support matters too." I stared at the numbers on the screen and didn't say anything. The silence stretched. "We're just being realistic," Darren said. "We know where you're at." Candace smiled. "You can't even afford a car, right? That taxi yesterday looked rough." Mom tried to soften the moment. "You deserve better, honey. That thing you drive around, it's just junk." I let the laughter roll through the room. Their assumptions always came dressed as kindness. Later, I stepped out to get some water, walking slowly down the hallway toward the kitchen. Their voices drifted in before I even reached the doorway. Candace light and amused. "She'll pay whatever we tell her. What else is she gonna do?" Darren steady and smug. "She's got no leverage, no job, no savings. She's lucky we included her." They didn't whisper. Not really. They didn't think they had to. I stood in the hall for a few seconds, my hand still resting on the fridge handle, the glass half full. The weight of their words didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how calm I felt hearing them. I went back to the living room, sat in the same wobbly stool they always left for me, and waited. Darren clicked through the last few slides, emphasizing how important it was to act quickly. "This level of care doesn't stay open long," he said. Candace leaned forward. "We're not pressuring you, Rachel. But let's be honest, you can't even keep up with rent, right?" Mom smiled, touching my hand. "We just want you to be okay." That's when I picked up my phone and called Brittany. "It's time," I said quietly. 5 minutes. Darren frowned. "We're not finished here," he said. "Can you put that away?" I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "Just sorting out my ride." Candace grinned. Another taxi I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, the air outside began to tremble. First a low rumble, then the unmistakable rhythmic thud of rotors overhead. Mom looked toward the window. "Is that a helicopter?" Dad shifted in his chair. Candace's face went pale. Darren stood and moved toward the front door. I stood brushing crumbs from my lap. "That's for me," I said. The roar of the blades filled the house, rattling the dishes on the counter. Ryan hovered the black helicopter just over the vineyard grass before settling it down in front of the porch. I opened the door, turned back once and said, "We're not done, but we're going to finish this somewhere else." The next part of the story doesn't begin with a conversation. It begins with the look in their eyes as they walked outside and saw what I'd kept hidden all these years. The air was thick with dust as the helicopter blades slowed, the sound fading into the quiet buzz of the vineyard. Darren was the first to step out, shielding his eyes with one hand, his polished shoes crunching against gravel. Candace followed, clinging to her purse like it could explain any of this. Mom and Dad came last, helped down by Ryan and Brittany, both of whom stayed quiet, respectful. The house in front of them wasn't large in a showy way, but it sat confidently on the hill, wide porches, open glass windows, soft stone walls that caught the light. Inside the main room was cool and still. I motioned for them to sit. Darren took the leather couch near the window. Candace hovered before sinking into an armchair. Mom chose the edge of the love seat, and Dad lowered himself slowly beside her, his hand shaking slightly as it reached for hers. I didn't offer refreshments. There wasn't time. "This is my place," I said. "Bought it last year. We use it as a base for my company's regional work." The silence felt longer than it probably was. Candace blinked. "Company?" Her voice was smaller than usual. Darren sat straighter. "Since when do you have a company?" I looked toward Brittany, who stepped forward and handed me a folder. "It's called EcoArt," I said, keeping my tone even. "We focus on carbon tracking tools for small businesses. Started it about 8 years ago. Sold a controlling stake 6 months back. $40 million. I placed the folder on the table but didn't push it toward them. Dad blinked first. 40? What Mom's mouth parted, but nothing came out. Darren's jaw tightened, his face blank. Candace let out a breath that sounded more like a gasp. No one moved. I stayed on with equity and leadership, I added. Still working, just not out of a coffee shop anymore. Brittany remained at my side, her hands folded, eyes on the floor. I waited. Darren was the first to speak. "Why wouldn't you say anything?" His voice had lost its usual edge. "You let us think you were scraping by." I didn't answer that yet. Instead, I opened the folder, pulled out the next sheet, and passed it to Mom. "This is from the Westbrook Foundation," I said. "We're opening a care campus for memory patients in 3 counties. You and Dad already have a place, fully funded." Candace leaned forward. "You're saying you've just been sitting on all this like—" Quietly, I nodded. No one asked. The room stayed still, even as the wind outside pressed gently against the glass. Darren laughed once, a short, brittle sound. "You could have said something. All this time." I met his eyes. I tried once. "You called it a hobby." He looked away. Candace's hands tightened around her purse. "What about everything you said last night? You let us think you were struggling." I stayed quiet. She stood abruptly. "This is about making us look small. You brought us here to humiliate us." "No," I said. "I brought you here to correct the record." I reached for another page, this one addressed to Darren. "Your promotion at Price and Keller. The one that came after your pitch on carbon mapping. That was my design. I saw the materials through a contact." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "You stole it, Darren, and now your firm's under audit." Candace stepped back, bumping into the table. "How do you even know that?" Her voice trembled. "Because I pay attention." I turned to Brittany again, and she passed me a final sheet. "Mom, all those insurance refunds, the ones that showed up right when Dad's first symptoms began." She nodded slowly. "Those were from me. I covered those visits, quietly." Her hand moved to her chest. "You did that?" I nodded once, because someone needed to, and because I knew you'd never believe it was me. For a while, no one spoke. The tension wasn't like it had been in Pine Valley. It wasn't coded in smugness or assumption. It was raw, exposed, honest in a way none of us had managed before. Candace looked at me, her expression caught between anger and something else. "You're not the only one with problems, Rachel. My marriage isn't perfect. That job, it doesn't feel anything real. But at least I don't keep secrets to make a point." I met her gaze. "You told people I was unstable, that I couldn't be trusted. That cost me investors, friends. You made a choice too." Darren stood his hands on the back of the chair. "This is still just a game to you. All this—" He gestured toward the house, the view outside the helicopter still faintly visible through the trees. "You think money erases everything?" "No," I said quietly, "but it pays the bills you weren't planning to." Mom stood next slower than the rest. Her eyes were glossy, but her voice stayed soft. "Rachel, I didn't know. I didn't see it." Dad remained seated, eyes down. He muttered something I couldn't quite hear, then tried again. "You did good." Candace grabbed her purse, her heels tapping across the floor as she moved toward the door. "I need air." Darren followed a few steps behind her, not saying a word. I stayed inside. Brittany looked at me for a moment. "Want me to walk them out?" I shook my head. "Let them go." The room emptied slowly. Tyler appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, eyes wide, holding a tray that hadn't been touched. He waited for a signal. I gave him a nod, and he quietly turned back down the hallway. Outside, the breeze picked up. I stood by the window watching Candace pace near the vineyard fence, Darren on his phone. Mom sat alone on the porch swing, her hands folded tight in her lap. The reveal was over, but I knew the silence that followed was where the real fracture began. Mom stayed on the porch swing long after the others drifted away, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes on the gravel path that curved around the oak trees. I brought her a glass of water and sat down beside her, the boards creaking beneath us. Neither of us spoke at first. The air smelled faintly of lavender and warm dust, and the sun was starting to dip behind the hills. "You always liked quiet places," she said finally, her voice low. "Even as a kid. You'd sneak off to the corner of the vineyard with a book, or sit under the porch with that little notepad." I nodded. It helped me think. She took a sip from the glass and stared straight ahead. "I should have asked more. I thought you were fine doing your own thing." I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence said more. Inside, Brittany was tidying the table. Tyler had already taken the untouched plates back to the kitchen, the clink of dishes soft and steady behind the walls. Darren was on the phone in the side room pacing. Candace had moved to the guest room Brittany had prepared, the door now closed tight. I stayed with Mom a while longer before walking back into the house. Dad had fallen asleep on the couch, one hand still resting on his knee, the other curled around the armrest. The room was quieter now, the kind of stillness that follows after something loud. In the kitchen, I stood with my back against the counter. Brittany handed me a folder I hadn't opened yet. It held the full breakdown of Mom and Dad's care plan, the logistics, the medical staff roster, the foundation's guarantees. I flipped through it slowly. Brittany watched for a second, then said, "You don't have to do it all alone." I gave a small nod. "I know." The next morning, sunlight spread across the living room floor in soft gold lines. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and set out mugs without asking who wanted one. One by one they came in. Darren looked tired, but alert. Candace wore a new blouse still crisp from the suitcase. Mom moved carefully, her cane clicking against the wood. We sat at the table without ceremony. I passed around the coffee and a plate of toasted bread Tyler had set out before leaving for the morning. The room was quiet until Dad spoke, his voice dry. "Are we still mad?" Mom patted his hand, but no one answered. I cleared my throat. "There's something else I wanted to show you." Brittany appeared with a tablet and placed it gently in front of Candace. The screen lit up with a slideshow images from the Westbrook Foundation campus, wide walking paths, glass-walled memory therapy rooms, staff with name tags and warm smiles. I spoke as they watched. "We're opening 3 locations this year," I said. "The first one will be in Central Valley. You'll have private rooms, medical teams, recreation programs. Dad, they even have a wine blending workshop for memory stimulation." He smiled faintly. Candace looked up from the screen. "This is where you're putting them." I nodded. "They'll be safe, comfortable, and close enough to visit." Darren's fingers tapped the side of his mug. "And you're covering the whole thing." I didn't look at him. "It's already done." He leaned back, the chair creaking. "So what now?" "We're just guests in your world." I didn't answer that either. Mom stood up slowly, her hands pressed against the back of the chair. "I want to see it," she said, "before we say yes. I want to walk the halls, ask questions, meet the nurses." I smiled. "You'll get a full tour. I already scheduled it for Friday." Candace looked between us. "You've thought through every step of this, haven't you?" Her voice was quiet, but not accusatory. "It's what I do," I said. There wasn't much left to discuss after that. The rest of the morning passed in short sentences and small sips of coffee. Around noon, Darren gathered his things and stepped out to make another call. Candace helped Mom back to the couch, folding a blanket over her legs. Dad stayed asleep. Later, I stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the wind push through the tops of the vines. Brittany came to my side. "They're not ready to say thank you," she said. "But I think they know." I didn't respond. We both looked out at the rows of green fading into the distance. That evening, I found an old photo album tucked in the hallway cabinet. I brought it out and set it on the coffee table without saying anything. The cover was worn, the corners bent, but the pages still held together. One by one, they joined me. Mom on my left, Dad to her side, Candace across from me, and finally Darren standing for a moment before sitting down. We flipped through slowly. Pictures of birthday parties in the backyard, Darren's baseball trophies, Candace's homecoming dance, me with a science fair ribbon no one remembered. There were smiles, but also long silences. At one point, Mom pointed to a photo of the 3 of us as kids sitting under the old oak tree behind the house. "That was the last summer before high school," she said. "You built that fort out of vineyard crates, remember?" I nodded. "I remember." Candace touched the edge of the picture. We were all different then. No one disagreed. It was late when we said goodnight. Darren offered a stiff nod. Candace gave me a quiet thank you before heading to the guest room. Mom kissed my cheek and Dad patted my hand without words. When the house fell silent again, I stayed downstairs, the photo album still open in front of me. The porch light buzzed faintly outside. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like I had to brace for it alone. The morning of the tour arrived clear and bright. Brittany had everything packed in the SUV folder's appointment confirmations, even a cooler with snacks in case Mom got tired halfway through. Tyler helped Dad down the porch steps while Candace smoothed her blazer, and Darren checked his watch twice before we'd even pulled out of the driveway. The ride to the Foundation's new care facility took just under an hour. No one spoke much. The road wound through gentle hills past grazing cattle and stretches of orchards that reminded us all of home, even if no one said so. We pulled up to a wide one-story building wrapped in warm cedar and long windows. 2 nurses waited outside clipboards, in hand dressed not in scrubs, but in soft, colored polos with name tags. They greeted us by name, offered water bottles, and walked slowly as we followed them toward the main entrance. Mom's cane clicked against the stone walkway her steps measured. Dad shuffled beside her eyes, scanning everything. He didn't say much, but he didn't look confused, just quiet. Inside, the air smelled faintly of citrus and eucalyptus. A soft, instrumental melody played overhead, not loud, just enough to cover the silence. We were shown the memory rooms first. Calm spaces with nature-themed murals, textured walls for sensory work, and bins filled with familiar objects from the 50s and 60s. Candace asked questions about staff ratios. Darren hovered near a whiteboard where the weekly activity schedule was written in careful blue marker. I stood at the back and let the staff explain things. This wasn't about me anymore. When we toured the residential wing, Mom paused at the doorway of a private suite. A nurse offered to let her sit on the edge of the bed. She took the invitation, her fingers running across the knit blanket that matched the pale green walls. "It's quiet," she said. "Not cold quiet. Just peaceful." The nurse smiled. "We try to make it feel like home." Dad stood in the doorway for a long while, looking at the window that overlooked a rose garden just beginning to bloom. After the tour, we sat down in one of the common rooms. The nurse brought tea and ginger cookies. Brittany passed out folders with the finalized plan move-in dates, support options, key contact staff. Candace flipped through hers carefully. Darren scanned the first page, then folded the packet in half. "It's impressive," he said. "I didn't expect all of this." Candace nodded. "You've done a lot here." Quietly. She glanced at me but didn't linger. "I guess we were wrong about how things looked from the outside." I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. Back at the ranch, Tyler had lunch ready. Lemon chicken, wild rice, and fresh greens from the garden out back. We sat outside this time, under the shade of the pergola. Candace helped Mom to her seat, while Darren uncorked a bottle of wine that had been chilling since morning. Dad toasted, lifting his glass slowly and saying, "To good changes." No one corrected him. The food disappeared slowly, the way it does when no one's quite sure what comes next. Darren was the first to speak after the plates had been cleared. "I've been thinking about things," he said, setting his wine glass down carefully, "about what I said earlier and what I didn't." Candace didn't interrupt, though her eyes shifted toward him. "I used your idea," he continued, eyes on the table. "Back then I told myself it wasn't stealing because I adjusted the numbers, reworded things. But it was yours." I nodded once. He looked up. "I'm sorry." The apology was quiet, but it didn't feel rehearsed. Candace spoke next. "I told people you'd crashed," she said, "that you were unstable, that you were wasting time on nothing. And when I heard things were working out for you, I didn't believe it. I didn't want to." Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. "I told myself you were just lucky, that you'd gotten help from someone, that it wasn't real." She looked at me. "But it is." Mom cleared her throat. "We didn't mean to make you feel small, Rachel. We thought we were helping, encouraging you to find your footing. But we didn't ask what mattered to you. We just filled in the blanks." I sat quietly for a few seconds. Then I said I let it happen. "I didn't correct you. I didn't fight back when it might have counted." I looked at them. But I couldn't forget it. And it changed how I showed up for you, for myself. No one spoke right away. The wind moved through the trees at the edge of the property, rustling the vines and pushing the chimes near the kitchen window into a slow, steady ring. Brittany appeared in the doorway, then stepped back inside. She knew we needed the space. After a while, Candace stood. "I'm going to take a walk," she said. Darren followed her a minute later. Mom leaned back in her chair, eyes closed behind her sunglasses. Dad reached for her hand, their fingers resting lightly together on the table. I stayed there a while, the quiet no longer sharp but steady, like a tide going out. The worst of it had passed. What came next wasn't clear, but it felt like it would be built more honestly. And I had one more piece to put in place, one more truth to settle before we all went our separate ways. That evening, after everyone had settled into their corners of the house, I walked down to the small office off the back patio. Brittany had already set out the file I'd asked for, a thin folder marked private in black ink. I stood by the desk for a moment, just looking at it. Then I opened it and flipped to the third page. Inside was a summary of communication between a contact at Darren's firm and one of our legal partners. Quiet, careful wording. Nothing dramatic, but it confirmed everything I suspected. Darren's promotion, the one he'd built on my prototype, was falling apart. A compliance review had started the previous quarter. The numbers didn't match what the board had been told. I closed the folder and walked back inside. The hallway light was still on. As I passed the guest room, I heard Candace on the phone. Her voice was hushed, and I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough something about her husband not coming that weekend. Something about flights being canceled that never were. I kept walking. The next morning, Brittany made eggs and toast. Mom and Dad ate on the sun porch. Darren didn't come down. Candace sat across from me at the kitchen table, her phone face down, untouched. "You said you had something else to show us," she said. Her tone was light, but her eyes were steady. I nodded. After breakfast. We met again in the living room, the same place we'd started the week before. The light through the windows was sharper now, not quite as forgiving. I waited until everyone was seated. Then I opened the folder and handed a copy to each of them. "These are the internal records from Price and Keller," I said. "I didn't request them. They came to me through someone who thought I should know." Darren flipped through the pages quickly, his jaw tense. Candace looked over his shoulder. "What is this?" she asked. Darren didn't answer right away. "It's my app," I said. "My original wireframe. The one I showed Darren years ago, back when I thought we could work together." I kept my voice calm. "It's also the one he pitched to his firm without my name on it." Darren pushed back from the couch. "You've made your point. What are you trying to do now?" "Ruin me." I shook my head. "No. I'm giving you a chance to say something real. Before the fallout finishes what you started." Mom sat still, her hands in her lap. Dad watched Darren closely. Candace stood. "So that's it? This is just some long play to expose him to make us look small." I turned to her. "This isn't about exposure. This is about telling the truth in a room where no one ever asked for it." She crossed her arms. "And your silence all these years was that truth too. Or just convenience." Her voice wasn't sharp, just tight. I let the question hang there. I stayed quiet because every time I tried to share anything real, you both shut it down. You rolled your eyes. You changed the subject. Darren looked at our parents. "She's just trying to tear this family apart. None of this is helping them." Mom looked over slowly. "You did that yourself," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. There was a long pause. Then I added one more thing. "I've also reviewed the paperwork for the Foundation Trust. I've reassigned point of contact roles. From now on, all decisions about Mom and Dad's care come through me. That's already been filed." Darren stood, his hands clenched. "So now you're cutting us out." I didn't respond. Candace stepped forward. "That's not fair. You don't get to make all the calls." "I'm not stopping you from visiting," I said, "but I'm not leaving their future in the hands of people who once joked about what I couldn't afford." The silence this time was heavier, not angry, just settled, like everyone knew there was no taking the words back. Brittany entered quietly, her tablet tucked under her arm. "The pilot's ready," she said softly. I turned toward the hallway to grab my bag. Candace followed me. At the front door, she paused. "You were right," she said, "about a lot of things." She didn't cry. Her voice was even. "But I don't know what you want from us now. I don't want anything I said. I just needed you to see it, all of it." Outside, the helicopter waited, its blades already starting to spin. Darren stood off to the side, not speaking. Mom hugged me at the top of the steps. "Be careful," she said. Dad nodded once, his eyes clearer than I expected. "You did right." Candace stepped back as I climbed in. I didn't look down until we were in the air, Pine Valley shrinking below us. The vineyard, the hills, the porch swing, all fading into distance. I didn't know what would come next for them, but for the first time, I felt like I'd taken back something that had been mine all along. The ride back to Los Angeles was quieter than usual. Ryan didn't ask any questions. Brittany sat beside me with her tablet tucked under one arm, checking schedules but saying nothing. The horizon stretched out wide as we lifted above the last line of vineyards, and soon the hills faded into the haze. I leaned back against the seat and let the sound of the blades fill the space where words didn't belong. By the time we landed, the sun was low enough to catch on the edge of my building downtown. Brittany helped unload the bags while I walked ahead, scanning the front steps out of habit. No voicemails from Candace, no messages from Darren. I didn't expect any. Inside the loft felt the same. Clean, open, quiet. I placed the folder from the ranch on the entry table and kicked off my shoes. Brittany lingered in the kitchen, eyes on her phone. "Do you want me to follow up with the foundation team?" she asked. I shook my head. Not yet. The rest of the week passed in small motions. I signed off on a new round of funding proposals, reviewed architecture plans for a second foundation campus, and sat through 3 video calls that stretched longer than they needed to. Still, I moved through each one carefully without letting the past few days cloud what I'd built. By Thursday, the shift had started. Darren's name hit the news first. Not a headline, just a short note in a real estate industry newsletter about internal audits and restructuring. I read it twice, then moved on. That afternoon, Brittany forwarded an alert from a local business journal. Candace's firm had quietly removed her from a major account following unverified conduct conflicts. The wording was vague, but the signal was clear. People were talking. I didn't reach out. I didn't watch it unfold. Instead, I spent Friday walking through our West Side project site, a rehabilitation garden being built behind a school. The contractor showed me the plumbing layout. A teacher waved from the playground. A girl in a green sweater handed me a leaf and told me it was lucky. I said thank you and tucked it into my coat pocket. That evening, I poured a glass of tea and sat by the window, the ocean just visible past the neighboring rooftops. The breeze came in softer now. I checked my phone once before setting it down on the coffee table. No calls, no missed messages. Only a reminder from Brittany about the trust paperwork for Mom and Dad. The final documents had been approved. Everything was in place. Saturday morning, I walked the cliffs by the beach. A few joggers passed a couple pushed a stroller. I took the long route back, stopping at the small bench overlooking the inlet. I sat for a while watching the water shift under the wind. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a message. "Let me know when you're ready to talk about next steps." No name, no extra words, just a signal. I didn't wait for a reply. By the following Tuesday, a certified letter arrived. It was from Candace. Inside was a single page, handwritten. It didn't apologize. It didn't explain. It only said, "I'm figuring things out. I hope one day we can talk without defensiveness between us." I folded the paper once and left it on the bookshelf. 2 days later, Darren called. He didn't leave a voicemail, but later that afternoon, I saw an email short-typed in his usual clipped style. "I know you had no reason to do what you did for them, but you did. I won't forget that. We won't be close, but I'll respect the line you drew. It didn't ask for anything." And that was enough. The following week, I got a call from the care team. Mom had settled into the new suite, and Dad was adjusting better than expected. The staff mentioned that Mom kept asking for recipe cards from the old house. I scanned a few into an email and added a note. "Still your lemon bars, even if someone else is making them now." Brittany stepped into my office with a mug of tea. "You doing okay?" she asked. I nodded, just finishing something that took a little longer than it should have. She smiled gently. "You finished it the way it needed to be finished." That night I sat at my desk, leaf still resting in the corner. I picked it up once, turned it over, and set it back down. It had been a long time since I felt like I could close a chapter without wondering if someone would twist it behind my back. But this time I knew exactly who I was, and no one else would be writing that ending for me. A few weeks after everything settled, I got a voicemail from the nurse at the care center. She said Dad had started humming again, same melody every morning while he watched the light come through the window. She didn't know the tune, but she said he tapped it out on the armrest, steady as a clock. I smiled when I heard that. It was an old lullaby from when we were kids, something Mom used to hum in the kitchen when the sun came up too early and everyone was still half asleep. Mom had started writing again, too. Short letters, mostly recipes and stories from the activity center. One note came with a Polaroid, her, and another resident grinning in aprons, a tray of peach muffins cooling between them. The handwriting was shakier than it used to be, but the voice was still hers. She signed it, "Love always from your proudest cook." Darren didn't reach out again after that last email. I heard from a mutual contact that he stepped down from his position quietly, took some time off to reset. Candace emailed once more. Just a short message. She said she and her husband were working on things. She was applying for a teaching fellowship out of state, something low profile but meaningful. She ended it with, "I'm trying to be softer now. That used to be your thing." I didn't reply, but I saved it. I kept running the company, quietly the way I always had. We broke ground on a new site near Bakersfield, this one focused on tech apprenticeships for adults transitioning out of caregiving roles. I visited once a month, met with the team, walked the lots in old sneakers no one recognized me in. It felt good to be useful without being watched. One morning I went down to the beach early. The fog was still thick and the sand cold underfoot. I sat on the same bench where I'd once tucked a lucky leaf into my coat pocket. I thought about everything that had happened, the years of being overlooked, the quiet sacrifices, the bitterness I'd carried longer than I should have. And I realized I didn't feel small anymore. For so long, I thought proving myself meant being seen, that someday I'd earn a seat at their table by showing I belonged. But the truth is, I was always building something stronger than approval. I just didn't know it yet. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's not a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it's just a daughter quietly rewriting the story no one bothered to ask her side of. And sometimes that's enough. Thank you for walking this road with me. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, someone you've outgrown, something you've reclaimed, I'd love to hear it. And if not, I hope it left you a little steadier than when it found you.